let's do open discussion, which is I always say, let's go to open discussion. I'm worried that it's a free for all and then nothing changes. But yeah, so just, it's open, whoever wants to talk. And
I missed like 75 messages here.
Okay, Mark, now the discussion, talk about your inertial propulsion. What is the motivation behind it? Why do you
That's my gamble. Bring on my gamble.
But you should have some thought about it. There is something behind it. Tell me what it is, describe
what it is. Okay, well, my gamble described this device using gyroscopes to create to go from angular momentum to linear momentum. Okay. And if you're able to do that, which if you ever hold a gyroscope that's spinning at 15,000 RPM, you can really feel it. Like it's locked onto space-time or something's going on there. So it makes sense that something can happen. It would also explain where inertial mass comes from, because if you think of inertial mass comes from the core of the atom, that's where all the mass is. Mm-hmm. In the core of the atom, we have subatomic particles that are basically electromagnetic energy spun in on itself, which is when something's spinning, it's a gyroscope. And they're also spinning incoherently. They're not like all spinning in one nice axis, all pointed in the same direction, for all eternity. They're actually pretty random and frayed, and there's precesses and all that kind of stuff happening. And if there is a connection to between angular momentum and linear momentum, then when you change your linear momentum, aka your momentum, the angular momentum of all those spins should change. So throwing a baseball changes the subatomic particle spins in the baseball. That's where angular momentum comes from. That's where momentum comes from. And to make that connection and prove it with a pretty simple device that we can machine here at the lab, I think is great. And the potential uses for a device like this are, this can go to into space on a CubeSat and provide, if it can provide 1 pound of thrust, that'll take a CubeSat to Mars pretty easily.
That's kind of related to Ozone physics behind it. The Ozone, you spoke about the
dynamic nuclear radiation.
You have the gyroscope.
All of these experiments that we're working, all these experiments that we're working on are all like connected in some way, because it's all the physical reality that we live in, and you need to get into those really fine details.
Jeremiah wanted to say, Jeremiah, we're in open discussion. Don't put your hand up.
Yeah, that's right. What's up, Jeremiah? You're muted.
Yeah, I just realized. Seeing as we have Gamble here, I wanted to ask Mike about the offset of the gyros. I mean, show your gyro again. Just hold it up so everybody can kind of see it. And because you have your gyros basically centered around the precession axes, where they're basically rotating back and forth. And Mike had also mentioned it, and we briefly talked about it. I would like to hear Mike's opinions on that design as far as how much the gyros need to be offset and how much that's going to affect it, or even if it's possible to get any kind of force if they're centered like that on their pivot axes.
Is Mike still here?
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I don't know. Is he?
I think Mike's here. Yeah, I mean, it says he's here.
He's here. It says he's logged in.
I don't see him in it.
Hope he can. I guess he's not in front of the computer though right now. So.
Oh yeah.
I guess I'll have to watch that webcam and see when he comes back. I'll save that question for when he comes back.
I'm probably going to have another Zoom call with him for an engineering update.
Mike's been kind of quiet lately too. I think he said he was working on something. I think that's he's been kind of quiet for the last month or two.
Yeah, I had a call with him, I think it was about a month ago when we first talked about this gyro thing. And then he sent me an email asking for an update. This is the update, but I'll get back with him and we'll go over some of the stuff. I'm going to try it this way regardless, without any offset, just to see what it does. A lot has to do with programming, how the servos pulse. And you could do that with your thumb with the RC remote control setup. So
yeah, if you can figure out why that decay time, why it likes to accelerate almost instantly, but then it seems to have this built-in ramp down where it doesn't hold its velocity in one direction, it kind of slows down to its set position. If we could figure out how to get around that little issue with those servos, that'd be great. Because then you can really get that kick or that jerk acceleration that's going to be required to produce these kinds of forces.
Yeah, I'll have to play with
Hey,
it a
Mike's
little
back,
more.
by the way.
Hey, Mike.
Just came back. Yeah, Mike, you were off for a minute, but I had a question for you specifically, and it was about Mark's design with the offset of the gyros. They pivot at their axes of precession, so they're not offset from center by any amount. And I wanted your opinion on whether this device could actually produce a force or whether they need to be offset. Could I get your words on that, Mike?
He's muted.
Oh, yeah, and Carl, you don't have to put your hand up either.
Yeah, Mike, you're muted. Mike,
I'm
Mike,
gonna
you're
need to
muted.
get, for open discussion, I'm gonna get like a gone fishing sign.
Now I'm going to change direction of the topic, but I
Hey.
don't want to distract.
Sorry about
We're already
that.
talking about-
Too many buttons. You can get a little bit more force out of them if you offset the gyros. However, it puts a severe load on the servo motors.
Oh, just a little bit. Are we talking like 5, 10%, 20%?
Well, the test article I made here for Tom, I put a 2-inch offset on there, which is why I had to put the bigger servos on there because the regular ones couldn't handle it.
But how much more thrust are we talking about from the offset?
Well, I would say I probably just about doubled it with 2-inch offset. But-
Right. Something else that I mentioned earlier, and I think you said this as well, is that the propulsion's not coming from the gyros themselves spinning. It's coming from the servos that twist the gyro. That's actually where, you know, the
Well,
strong.
it's a vector process. You got 3 orthogonal vectors. One is the torquer motor and the other is the spin vector so the faster you spin it and the faster you torque it, the more power you get out of it.
Right. But my point is that if let's say the bearings were, you know, completely lossless in the gyro, it would continue spinning. There would be no energy loss in its spin. The energy loss is coming from the servos themselves, right?
Well, you can see, I monitor the voltage and the current on the gyro motors. When you start servoing them, you can see there's a slight loss, you know, where the motors have to bring the gyros back up to speed. So there is some power being lost in the gyros when you servo them. If you just let them sit still, then that loss isn't there outside of bearing loss.
So
Right,
what you're
well-
saying, Mike, if I may ask to clarify, you're saying there's actually a radiated power loss, as in these gyros are losing RPMs, they're somehow losing energy, and it's not frictional, is what you're saying. It is
Yeah,
not a frictional
it's
effect. This is
turned
actually a
into-
power loss from the system.
It's
from
being
the
turned
angular
into
momentum.
force.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
that explains everything. And see, that works very well with Todd's model and with many of the other models that we've looked at, where we have to have a power loss from a system in order to generate a gradient field force. So that would make perfect sense.
But
Yeah,
we'll
there's-
first have to
there's
calculate
energy being
the
converted.
friction.
There's energy being converted from rotary to linear. You'll like my next pitch.
That's actually the first time I think anybody said it so clearly as to exactly where the source of propulsion force is coming from and where that differential is being supplied. Because I would assume that most everyone dealing with gyros and bearings and frictional systems just assume that it slows down because it must be bearing friction, right? It couldn't certainly be a power loss from the angular momentum of the system with the stored energy, right? It's got to be friction. But no, what you're saying is something very, very fundamental, and we really need to pay attention to specifically that. We are losing power from the stored velocity
Well,
of
you're not
all that
losing
mass.
it because the motor supplies it. So
You're converting it.
you're converting
Right.
electrical energy from the gyro motor into forward velocity.
Through the mechanical
Wow.
conversion of angular momentum.
Bingo.
Wow.
Yeah, that's critical, man. That's awesome that you said that. I'm so glad that you clarified that really coherently, because
Yeah,
that was
yeah. Thank you for that. I was under the assumption that it had to do with the servos, but we'll definitely
it-
get some data from this.
There is servo power. That's one third of the equation there. So the servos supply, the faster you torque them, the more power you get out of them. So that translates to watts going into the servo motor.
Mike, one question for you. If if gravity is the force input that you put into a gyroscope, it will generate a gyroscopic force 90 degrees from the gravity vector. Now on the, I've seen some gyroscope that go up, you know, like the Englishman, somehow as if it was a vertical force produced. Can you explain why is it producing like a vertical force, even though the output force of the gyroscopic force is 90 degrees from the gravity vector?
Well, it's not exactly 90 degrees. It's 90 degrees from the spin vector. The output force, it's like electric motor. You got 3 orthogonal vectors. And when you rotate it, spin it, the force vector goes up. And that's why that 50-pound gyro, the guy just holds it with one hand. But as soon as he stops spinning, he feels the full weight and he has to catch it with 2 hands.
Yeah, in some experiment, I know I saw one in the internet. There was a professor in one of the universities in New York that he took a gyro, spin it, and put it on a weight scale. And he showed that even the weight that is, you know, doing that, you know, that actually there is no change in the weight of the gyroscope. And yet he is able to hold it so light, you know, and kind of the explanation does not make sense because you measure, the force measure does not change the weight of the gyroscope. And yet he's able to create, you know.
I would have to argue that just a little bit. There's a video out, I think it's on YouTube, where they have 2 rotating gyros, and soon as it starts rotating, the whole thing lifts up and falls off the assembly, and then it crashes. It was on YouTube. I took a look at it, and it's.
I know what you're asking, Harold, if I may, and what he's referring to is a system that's in a state of already equilibrium. It's precessing, but it's precessing at an equal rate with an equal RPM. It doesn't have any jerk or kick. There's no acceleration event, so consequently, there's no extra force or no radiated energy. You have to have that acceleration event, that asymmetric jerk or the kick in physics in order to get energy out of that system and radiate it, or even absorb it.
That's what the servo supplies. The servo motor supplies that kick.
Right, and they don't go evenly too. Just an FYI, Harold, they don't move evenly back and forth from one direction to the other. They have very fast acceleration in one direction and a very slow return
in the other. Yes, that's the secret to rectifying.
Okay, if there is a vertical force produced by a gyroscope, can, for example, a gyroscope be used to, let's say, launch an airplane, you know, or a vehicle to go up in the air, to go up some altitude, let's say, straight up in the atmosphere?
I don't think the thrust to weight ratio has ever been achieved.
It's very bad. You can't use it like a rocket, but once you get it out into space where your weight goes to nothing, then you have usable force. The test article that I played with at Boeing weighed about 1,500 pounds, generated about 400 pounds of thrust. So if you put that in space, you could, the 1,500 pounds goes away. So you have usable 400-pound force generator, but 400 pounds is not going to lift 1,500 pounds off the earth.
But are they using a spaceship way out into space that is propelled 100% by the gyroscope to give it the thrust to drive it out into space?
Well, right now the space station has 4 gyros on it that it uses for station keeping. That's what they're primarily made for. All your geosync satellites out there have the same thing for station keeping.
Well, what about for propulsion? I mean, can you use to accelerate the spaceship? Let's say a satellite, let's say you want to take it from geostationary and you want to go to the moon and use a gyroscopic force to drive it all the way to the moon?
Well, it might not be very good, but for small corrections, they work very well. It's called station keeping. If you got to change it a few degrees or a few feet left, right, up, down, gyros work very well. But if you want to change the complete orbit, that might be pushing it.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the explanation.
Can I ask Gary a question? Gary, are you still there?
Still here? What's up?
Hey, I wonder if you happen to see the video of a craft coming out of a Lockheed Martin hangar. It looked a lot like one of your MHD.
Yeah, I haven't.
crafts.
I saw the link. Someone sent a Twitter link. I saw it, but because I
Oh,
wanted
you
to
know,
listen to the discussion, I haven't watched it yet.
I know I saw that. I saw that too. There was an image there. Yeah, that was it. The Daily Mail story that looked like a drone too. It didn't look like it had enough cockpit for a pilot. But I might have.
Might be
Well,
on
it had
that.
the same swoop feature in one of
Yeah.
your designs, that your slides that I noticed, and we sort of
Mhm.
started talking about it in the chat. And I was just interested in your take on that design.
Yeah, I'll look more closely at it. I have looked at their designs in the past, and some of them look, like they're intended for suborbital, some hypersonic. I'd have to really study it in more detail. But I think the Wave Rider design that the French were focused on was patterned after something they had seen over here. So I'm like getting it third hand because they're getting it second hand and I'm getting it from them. So it's like it's going among our people, and then part of it is getting released, and then the French have a take on it, and I'm looking at their take. I can't look like directly at the Lockheed Martin one until this link that got sent. So let me check it out right now. Hang on. Is that just a static or is it a video?
It should be a video from this guy's Twitter.
Yeah. Okay, it's like 7 seconds of video. I'm surprised they let that out of the door without any cover at all.
You and me both. But it's an interesting design that.
Yeah.
You've
Unless they
alluded to.
meant to. Maybe they wanted people to see it, right?
I don't see an intake. I mean, do you spawn an intake there?
Because think about it. They're like, hey, Bob, our stock price is kind of low. How can you fix that?
Yeah.
Hey, I got. And then, he's like, hold my beer.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, it might use skin effects. That's very interesting.
Yeah, you like
For
that?
all what we can derive from a 7-second clip, right?
Right.
At
Several
a single
seconds.
viewing angle. There's not a whole lot to get out of it, but it certainly doesn't seem to be conventional. If it's even a
doesn't-
real clip, that is.
Yeah, it doesn't look conventional. That's right. Interesting. That's a great clip.
Thanks.
Just a little comment on the gyroscopes. I know the gyroscopes got a torque. It rotates around and stuff like that. But if you make them counter rotating, then the torque is going to cancel out and you're going to end up with the vertical vector.
Yeah, that's the idea here. They're going to be both spinning in opposite directions.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, counter rotating, and then they're torqued back and forth along their second axes.
Okay, all right. Cool.
And there's a pulse to the torquing as well. So it's a strong pulse and then a slow return, sort of like they call it a ramp signal.
Hey, Mark, could I ask you a quick favor? Could you hold up that gyro again and show me in which direction it's supposed to torque, just so everybody can kind of be on the same page? I think a lot of people are confused about which direction it's supposed to produce its force, and I'd kind of like to hear your explanation of that too. Or which direction we would suppose a weight loss, or perhaps something else.
Well, they're going to torque left and right. I haven't really configured it much yet. I mean, I don't even know where these servos are set up to be. I was literally finishing it up as the conference was going on. I think the force is supposed to move like in this direction. So it would be along this axis, I believe.
Well, the thing I would mention, and maybe you'd want to test because you've already got kind of an ideal test set up in the Faraday cages. When you're precessing these things back and forth, you're going to have a higher amount of stress energy because of the angular velocity contained in those disks. So that higher energy being precessed is going to create a slight decoupling from the local coherency of gravitational fields from Earth. And I don't know if it'll be enough for you to detect, but you might not receive any kind of force directionally from that thing whatsoever. But what you might actually receive is a small change in its gravitational weight. So try to measure that if possible. Because
definitely
being that
put the
it's
whole
not
thing on scale.
offset, it's not technically going to produce a linear force in any direction because all forces are equivalently countered in their opposite direction from that movement, but there's still a stress energy tensor there that's going to be affected, and you could potentially measure a weight change.
Yeah, we'll measure for some weight changes. I mean, the thing weighs a lot, and I mean, it weighs 3 pounds, and it's going to be shaking a lot. When I powered up one of these gyros earlier, the amount of torque that was on it was like insane. Like it can stand up on the desk, and
yeah, but when you get two rotating in opposite directions, they're going to act quite a bit differently. In fact, if they're perfectly balanced, you'll not really notice anything at all in terms of its strange behavior. It'll act very much like a conventional mass. The only difference being it has a tremendous amount of angular momentum that can be processed. So even though if they move perfectly, counterclockwise, clockwise on opposite sides and back in the other direction, they always move at the same speed and they're lined up. You're not going to really notice any kind of torquing or force like you've seen with a single gyro on that thing. But again, you still have that stress energy tensor to take down. So
yeah, I got to finish machining off the top cap over here. These holes are just like 1/10 of a millimeter too small to fit. So as soon as I get that done, I'll be able to put the cap on and power it up.
heck yeah, man. I'll definitely be on video call for that one.
Okay, so who else is coming down to the lab for the anniversary? I know we got Robert Garden. Jeremy Race has his hands up. Carl wants to come.
Dude, I'm gonna come if I can. I've got something that on the East Coast coming up in the future that might bring me out business-wise. And so if the exhibit is gonna go up at the same time, I'll come out.
It's October 13th, so it's in 3
Is it
weeks.
November or October?
No, November 13th. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm stuck here for work. I'm always stuck here for work, but that's because I'm working like 3 jobs. So
Sorry, Mark, I'm stuck here too. I can tell you the details later.
Sorry, I wish I'm not too far away, but there's a border I cannot cross because of the COVID vaccine passport thing. So I'll see I'll see what I can do. But anyway, I'll be there. And are you going to be virtual or?
Oh yeah, we're going to be hybrid, virtual and in person.
All right, cool.
Robert, you can come catch a ride with me if you make it to Rhode Island.
I might as well go all the way. Sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I was thinking.
I take a cab.
I'll have to loan Phil one of my vaccine passports. I'm on the other end of the spectrum, man. I had Johnson & Johnson, and that sucks. And so then I went and got Moderna. And my wife was like, "You probably shouldn't have that many." And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to run them up both arms. Just be down, up one. I'm never getting sick.
Now you just need to try Pfizer.
Yeah. Oh, wait, I got to find another place that does that. They don't check each other. I got, you know what it was to be completely, I got Johnson & Johnson, and then they had that whole series of articles that came out and said, like, it's not effective, you're going to die. Right. And so I'm like, okay, well, fine. And so I went to get a booster for it, and they're like, you can't get a booster. I'm like, well, the government said I should be able to. And they said, well, we don't offer them yet unless you're 65. So I went to the city next door, and I just said, I need a shot. I haven't gotten mine yet. They're like, okay. Yeah. So yeah, maybe I'll do Pfizer now.
No, you're no, man. You can do boosters. You can do mix and match, especially if you have J&J. You can do you can get the mRNA vaccine booster. So
Oh yeah, I'll do that.
it's no big deal.
I'll do that. I'll get a Pfizer booster. Let me see. I got Moderna last month, so you know.
I think you need to wait, buddy. Just hold on. You're enthusiastic. I get it. Just I don't think it's the right way to do it.
Dude, you don't know. Maybe this is how people get superpowers, right? Like, you know what I mean?
Apparently, you got to come in contact with the craft, because if you come in contact with the craft, it does affect you, and that's how people get superpowers.
Oh, okay. I thought it was loading up on untested FDA unapproved COVID boosters. So I respect, you know what, and what's interesting is I know a lot of people that have not gotten the vaccine. So Phil, I'm not picking on you in any way, because I know a ton of people, like I know lots and lots of people who have not gotten the vaccine, but.
Yeah, I'm gonna try not to take it if I can, but if I have no other choice, I will. But in my case, I can work from home, so I don't have the problem of interacting with people and stuff like that.
Herd immunity happens a number of different ways. You get to herd immunity through vaccination. You get to herd immunity through people getting the virus and developing natural immunity. Herd immunity will happen because of it in either direction. Everyone will develop some immune response through either course of action, and I think everyone should just feel a little bit confident about that.
We're
no matter your choice. No matter your choice, we'll get there eventually.
I think we're in a strange, brave new world of the pandemic, right? Because it's kind of, in a weird way, it's still going on, but I think that we're emotionally all burned out on it. And, I mean, yeah, and that's the part that's changed, is emotional burnout. It's still, I don't know if that much has really changed. It's more like, I'm tired of it. I'm not going to deal with it anymore, so I don't know. That's what makes it interesting now. It seems like it's slowed down, but
it does. I think it has, and I think it's because, I think it's all very local too. I mean, depends on where you're at. Has it slowed down? Maybe, but I think that the facts are that it's either going to change and people have to get boosters if that's the route you took, or if you get reinfected and you develop an immunity against the new strain, then you'll get to herd immunity either way.
Yeah.
So I just think that that's the most important thing for people to think about right now, is that herd immunity is going to happen. We'll get there. It happened in 1917 with the first H1N1 flu. We got there. It took 3 years. And we're, unfortunately 2/3 of the way through, we're almost there. So,
and this would just be one really weird story that no one will be able to tell their kids, right?
Yeah.
Grandpa, what happened during the pandemic? And you're like, well, it'll be like the 60s, right? When I was a kid growing up, they're like, you won't understand the 60s unless you were there. Well, that would be the pandemic. We've learned some valuable things about human nature.
About it. I don't think it'll be like when I was a kid, we used to do duck and cover, where we'd have to go sit under our desks and think about the nukes being dropped. I mean, that's like that like traumatized me a lot when I was a kid, but we don't talk about that.
No, my mom did duck and cover when she was, yeah.
So, I mean, that's what'll happen. People won't talk about it. It's how we deal with trauma. We don't talk about it. But
you'll have those little habits, like Grandpa, why do you have so much toilet paper always in the shed? Boxes and boxes of toilet paper.
Why do you always wash your hands? Grandma always washes her hands. Why does Grandma always wash her hands? Well, it's a learned behavior that we've all picked up, and we'll keep doing that. And it's, these are valuable things that will become idiosyncrasies in a decade or two. So
I think the toilet paper thing was interesting, though. That was an unexpected. I think that was an unexpected revelation about human nature. That was think of any zombie movie that you've ever seen, right? Like The Walking Dead or any of those. The apocalypse happens, you see people running and screaming. That's how it's supposed to happen. But in real life, they all go to Costco to buy toilet paper.
Actually, what happened to me was kind of the opposite. I took the pandemic seriously back in January. Went to Home Depot and bought out a couple face masks and stuff. And then when the pandemic finally hit, I couldn't find paper towels anywhere. So I went to like a local supplier and ordered paper towels, and they just threw it in my truck with their masks on and everything. And when I got home, I noticed it was toilet paper. And I called them up trying to get to replace it for paper towels.
There you go. Well, no, you know what you need to do? You split it up and sell it on the black market. You should sell it on eBay, one roll, $20 a roll on eBay. People would be like,
So
"Dude,
what
you're a
have
year
we
too late."
learned during a mass pandemic? The most important thing for human need is wiping your behind. That's number one on the hierarchy of things that we obviously have to have as a society.
But that's only in the United States, because we use the most TP in the world, because other parts of the world, they don't have toilet paper. They have
So the
those,
decay,
toilets they have bidets. Yeah.
yeah,
So-
it's a controversial topic. Like,
So
who are you as a person?
It's a US
toilet paper,
thing.
or are you gonna go for a bidet?
Well, yeah.
Those are a lot more
Corn
effective.
cobs.
I don't know if anybody's ever had a chance to use them. They are
Corn
a lot more effective. They are. And no hard materials to have to be broken down by the leftover bacteria within the sewage lines. I mean, our local city here, we have a big city that's pretty population dense. So there have been newsletters put out. The city asks people to put still biodegradable food down their garbage disposal to enter it into the plumbing system, so the bacteria has something to break down all the toilet paper. It's one of those interesting phenomena where we now have this compound problem because there's just too many easily biologically breakdownable mass.
My plumber friend would disagree with you. Those garbage disposals are not for putting garbage in. You should never put anything in your garbage disposal. It's only for little crumbs.
Yeah, whatever.
Well, like I said, it was actually a newsletter set out by our city that asked people to specifically put biodegradable food into the sewage system so that it could help negate some of the problems with, I guess now the main problem is flushable wipes. That's becoming a serious issue, and they need active bacterial samples to be present in the sewage lines to break those things down before they ever enter the filtering facility. Otherwise, they'll clog up the filter grates. But
I don't think you're supposed to flush. I thought those went in the garbage. We put those in the garbage.
No, there's flushable
he's a
ones
little bit
now,
behind the
and
times.
Oh, I am behind the times.
Milwaukee is
issue-
behind the times. You're
issue
probably
is-
wherever you are. It's
okay,
probably far better.
There's three state. I used to be a sewer district director. So there's like 3 stages. Primary treatment is where they have this like big rake thing that goes around in a pond and takes all the TP and stuff and captures it and separates it out from the other stuff, the liquid stuff. And then it goes into this big tank called a digester. And it has all these bacteria like you're talking about, Jeremiah. And it's like simulates your gut. It's actually the same bacteria that's in your gut is in this thing called the digester. And then it goes to the tertiary treatment, which is basically a big charcoal filter. Okay, and actually, if you get tertiary treated, that's reclaimed water, and you can theoretically drink it, and it's cleaner than the water you get from your river, for example.
Oh yeah, I wish I could say that about this city, but this city has been sued so many times in its industry for polluting the natural fresh water sources that we're connected to, Lake Michigan specifically. Because of the poor filtration. In fact, if it ever gets over capacity, they just stop filtering and start dumping it into the fresh water sources. I'm not kidding.
I don't know much
It's
about
a crime against all people who
what I do know a little bit about is my ex-wife's father worked at a chopper pump factory, and those are interesting. Those are and those are sewage pumps. I don't know. Well, Michael, I don't know if you probably only would have heard of those if they were replacing them.
Jeremiah, I actually met somebody at the past 2 conferences who works at a waste treatment plant in your area. She's actually suing the EPA in order to remove fluoride from the water. And she went to work for the wastewater treatment plant. It's not in Milwaukee, it's in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
So a lot of places, what they do is they take the secondary treated water and they discharge it. And before they discharge it, they have to disinfect it. So the most common ways they use chlorine, anhydrous chlorine, to disinfect it. And then they dump it somewhere, like in the fresh water or estuary or salt water is what they do in California. And but the other way that you can treat it without using any chemicals is with ultraviolet light. and they'll actually put it in, expose it to ultraviolet light for a certain amount of time, and that'll kill all the bacteria. That'll kill all the bad bacteria, or the coliforms, as they're called.
This is the last thing I have to ask off topic, Michael, because we should probably get back onto the alternative propulsion. But because you're an expert in this topic, what about the new findings with ozonation treatment and being able to break down bioorganic matter? Because we know ozone is particularly caustic material for all bioorganics, and it can even break down solids like toilet paper if it's implemented in high volumes, bubbled through the fluid and circulated. So I wanted to know, have you heard anything about the advancement of ozone technology in sewage treatment?
No, and I'd be
yeah, it's used.
I would be concerned about leakage, because we don't want leakage of ozone into the atmosphere, obviously.
Oh,
Well,
you
no,
know
I
what?
mean, they're contained vessels, but I was
Josh,
just curious.
You do want ozone going into the atmosphere. I asked her that same question. They use ozone. They have very large ozone systems, and lots of oxygen. There's these little microbes that do most of the work. So they're pumping oxygen into these tanks in order to feed them, to keep them eating all the raw material, and then all the leftover poop is then turned to fertilizer and spread on our fields, and that turns then into the McDonald's that we eat, and the process repeats.
Yeah, and there's issues with that too, with the solids that are left over, because some things you can't get rid of, like you ever heard of a prion?
yeah.
A prion, that's what causes Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease or mad cow disease.
Yeah, and to get rid of prions, you actually have to heat meat. I read about this. In fact, Carl probably knows about this stuff. You have to heat the meat to the point where to denature the prion proteins, it's like 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Basically, you have to charcoal meat to get rid of prions. So
right, and so the problem is that this they use this, and then they have like reclaimed water. They're using reclaimed water, and the people would be like running on the field track, and then they'd get this flesh-eating bacteria. So there's definitely some issues with human contact with that kind of stuff. I mean, it's good. It's better than just dumping it in the ocean or into the estuary or the freshwater pond, the secondary treated. I would, in where I live, we have a problem with seawater intrusion. And so what they do is they take that tertiary treated water and they inject it into the ground, into the abandoned wells where they used to draw water before the saltwater intrusion. So theoretically, where our goal long term is to have what's called a zero discharge during a drought. So we wouldn't be dumping anything in the ocean anymore. We just inject it in the ground. So, but it's a cool subject. I know it's a little off topic. I apologize.
yeah, I was like, how did we end up here? Well, so yeah, let me see. Where was it at? Josh was asking about the Vimana. Josh? Where's Josh?
Yeah. Hi.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yep. So I just have a couple of still images so this is related to what they were talking about today with some of the temples that nobody really knows how they're made. So here's a pillar that has these kind of concentric grooves in it. And you can kind of see a couple of other examples like this one. They're made out of different colors of stone. And then if we go to this one, this is actually a carving that's in one of the temples. And it has a gear ratio of 2:1, so it sort of resembles a gear. And if we go to, I already had that one up. Here we see this presenter here on YouTube examining the stone. And here's a close-up of the stone where you see these concentric rings. And then so here's the stone, and then here's the pillars, and then here's the platform that was sort of maybe moved off to the side. And then here he's superimposed parts for a lathe. So maybe they had some kind of a lathe that they were using to spin the stone. They were spinning the stone and then actually lathing some of the stones for, back here at the various pillars. So the idea, I think the idea that ancient India had some of these technologies that were sort of lost over time kind of hold some water, and I was already kind of aware of some of this stuff. So I was really interested to see what they had to say today.
That is
I'll be
cool.
interested to see them again.
Yeah, and so I will definitely have them back. I did not know, and they weren't clear about their team. Srihari, yeah, okay, yeah, Mr. Srihari. Well, I guess we'll come back and speak.
It would be great to hear a discussion from their perspective about the use of mercury in the literature, and because there's so much conversation in modern times that could possibly connect, and it would be I would, as a listener, I would love to hear their expertise sort of come together with other people like Gary was talking about earlier, ionizing mercury and the potential of what that could be. I would love to hear those people come together.
Yeah, I'm also interested in the cultural aspect of it. That to me, it's just intriguing. It's just intriguing to see how different cultures approach and view these things, and so.
I thought it was
Show
really
how much
interesting.
we have in common.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting how they were talking about the linguistics and how the interpretations of these different phrases can be interpreted completely different ways. And in some ways, if you interpret it in the number 1 or number 2, it's about Lord Vishnu and his abilities. And if you go all the way out to the last one, where it was the materialistic interpretation, that it was actually a series of steps that you could perform in order to do something. And I had never heard of that before. So I'm really interested to kind of hear more about that.
That's actually a lot of what mystics, ancient mystics schools utilized in their rituals. It was basically like, a scientific process that was encoded in ritual.
Right. It almost, I double majored in college. I have a degree in French. So I thought it was really interesting that it almost seems like this language that they're talking about, the Sanskrit, it was constructed around the idea so that they could specifically do that. Like almost like it wasn't like they did it by accident and that they found these formulas based on looking at these things in some sort of mystical way. It's almost like they did it intentionally, where they had this series of steps and then they created a language so that they could reverse it back to Lord Vishnu.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's my take as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then somebody had asked about, how did China influence that? And he didn't really answer it, but I think part of that's because you're talking about like a cultural exchange that probably happened thousands and thousands of years ago, right? But that's interesting also. Again, I don't know. That whole, what would you call it, the rise of humankind has intrigued me. And there's so much happening right now in evolutionary genetics, right? Where archaeological genetics? I keep reading these articles about, being able to trace human migration patterns, right? Like out of Africa, and when different waves came out of Africa. And there's just this explosion of research that's happening there. So
I wanted to ask if they had talked about horses in the ancient Vedic text. Maybe that sounds like a weird idea to ask about, but we can actually chart the use of horses in terms of history, and we know where horse husbandry, or whatever that animal husbandry came from, which was Siberia. And so I'm always about finding those relations between things that we know in terms of genetics and then the documentation of those animals or whatever that gene may be in a historical context. So I almost wanted to ask about that, but I felt it was too off topic and my own personal interest. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and yeah, the other thing that I was reading about, what was the other ones? Racial and genetic Clines. That kind of goes to maybe what you were saying about how things migrate, but like, we tend to view things as like, well, like we would say this person is Asian, this person is Caucasian, this person is African American, right? But then another emerging area is this idea of Clines, where it's not, those boundaries that we create are totally artificial, right? And so as you cross like any landmass, you get, genetic, cultural, racial, you name it, it blurs. And that's always intrigued me too, it's that gradual transition from one group of people to another.
May I jump in with something? I just want to throw something at people. I like doing that. That's what I do for a living. This week I've had a crazy idea that a couple of million years ago or so, can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay. We discovered fire, and it was the hottest thing that we had ever discovered. And it seems to me that ever since then, every single invention of propulsion has been based on fire, because we tend to get off on tangents and we focus only on what we know, and we develop that we know. And it's very rare that people actually think outside the box. So they just want a better fire.
I would disagree. I would think that the first thing we did for propulsion or anti-gravity was a balloon.
No, propulsion would be a seafaring craft.
Oh yeah, it
And
could be a boat.
And we actually know that the Denisovan species, the subspecies, they actually conquered the ocean more than 300,000 years ago. We know this because they migrated from Asia through Indonesia down to Australia. They conquered the ocean as a species. That is mind-blowing to think that they did that so long before humans ever invented. They conquered the ocean. It's amazing. It blows me away every time I think about it.
Who are you talking about? The Devonians? Is that
The Denisovans.
Denisovan.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's like Neanderthals is one subclass, Denisovan is another. And it's actually believed that Denisovan could possibly be originators for some megalithic culture, ancient drilling technologies. They found intricately carved jewelry in the Denisova cave in Siberia in Russia that the drill marks for it is a high precision drill. But it goes so far back in history, we weren't doing this. Neanderthals may have been doing it, but the culture that we found was the Denisovan people. They actually were also responsible for, I think animal husbandry with horses and breeding horses and utilizing horses, ancient horses, but they figured that stuff out. And so I love ancient history, and that's kind of how I found all of the UFOlogy aspects of it. And
Yeah, I would agree with you. I don't think there's. I would say that that's the story of us, right? It's the story of all of us. And the thing that intrigues me is there's so much happening, right? Like the Denisovans, I think, what is that, 20 years? We didn't even know they existed 20 years ago.
Yeah.
This whole nother species of humans,
They might be giants. They might have been the species that was a giant. Their molars were so much larger than Neanderthals or human molars that, like, what kind of skull do those teeth fit into? Do you know what I mean? Like, we don't know. We don't have a skeleton yet. We don't know how big they were, but there's the biblical and historical accounts of really large humanoid people, and they're found all over the world.
I thought that they were the ones they called the hobbits. Not
so it's a slew. It's a slew of possible,
in California, in Americas, they used to think that the native people came over the Bering Straits, but it turns out there wasn't any period where there was an area that was habitable to come over that would have sustained people trying to immigrate across the Bering Straits. And
so
what they found is that instead, what they did is they used boats, and basically Samoan culture. And,
for sure.
And what they did is they went up they have what now they call it the kelp superhighway. And what
Yep.
they did is they followed the kelp beds all around the Pacific Rim, because there's kelp everywhere, all the way up to the northern latitudes and on down to the southern latitudes. And so basically there is a habitable zone along the rim of the Pacific that was able to sustain the transport of the human populations that populated the Americas. And they found archaeological evidence as far back as 30,000 years now.
Yep,
So
100%,
we don't
right.
know. It could go back hundreds of thousands of years.
It could go back so much farther than anybody's really conceptualized in terms of close.
And then
And one of the problems was that, during the Ice Age, the water level was a lot lower than it is now. And then after all that ice melted, it raised the sea level, and a lot of the areas that were habitable are now underwater.
Or easily traversable by boat from one island to another to get from Siberia to South America, whatever that transit might have been. Hugging the coastline with boats, it sounds like the smartest way to have done it, for sure. I totally agree with you about that for sure.
Then the other thing that I've been really interested in, and I think this is kind of known, I think it's still emerging, is the coevolution of humans and dogs.
Yeah.
And because I think that's like a perceptual, right? It's us and dogs, and we're different species, but we've been co-evolving for so long that we've kind of evolved together. And so I think that there's this perceptual change. I think it's difficult for us to admit that they're more a part of us than we traditionally thought.
Well, the other thing that's interesting about that, Tim, is if you think about all the different, basically in genetics, the way the thing looks is called phenotypical expression, or the phenotype. Okay?
Yeah.
So, but the genotype, basically all the dogs in the same species are dog species have the same genetic formula, basically the same what would you call it, recipe. Okay, it's how the recipe is expressed is so different. And then to think of that in the context of our discussions, or the whole idea of race. Okay, human, different races, so-called races among humans. And think of how much diversity there is among the dog species compared to the humans. And we have this problem with people looking different from us. But dogs don't seem to have that problem, do they?
It's trauma. A traumatized dog will cause more trauma on other dogs and humans. A traumatized human will cause more trauma on humans and dogs. And what is dog spelt backwards but us cleaning up their poop and them dragging us around everywhere, right?
Well, that's my cat. You're getting that confused with my cat. My cat thinks they own me.
There is the Native American tradition of assuming or believing that dogs had the knowledge of God going back 100,000 years.
Well, they do have excellent blackmail. We'll put it that way.
A dog has terrible instincts. I hope not.
Because they're quiet, they're around, they see things that happen, but they're not like cats. Cats would use it for blackmail. Dogs wouldn't do that.
Well, so what's interesting is the visual light spectrum mixed with their extrasensorial sound and smell, and that do they act like the dogs have these quote unquote sixth sense that it's like they can almost see paranormal, or is it that they can see, hear, and calculate energies that are in different wavelength spectrums that we cannot, that other potential conscious entities might exist in?
I would agree they have a better mass spectrometer than we do.
Well,
because that's what your smell is basically a mass spec. And
Yeah,
I've worked
right.
with dogs, forensic dogs. You ever heard of them? So what they do
Exactly.
when they're looking for burials is they bring in these forensic dogs, and they can smell someone that died a couple hundred years ago.
Yeah, and they I think the nose is 1,000 to 10,000 times more sensitive. Their night vision is around 8 times better night vision. Their day vision is not as good as ours.
But
They're-
even exponentially more, I'm thinking like from the perspective of like whales or bats or birds, and like they say how like the birds follow the magnetic lines. Are they actually able to see the magnetic energy spectrum in a different that we are completely blind to and oblivious to? And does that turn into like a whole higher dimensional like reality or perspective for them, like almost like they're plugged into like a military sonar sort of thing into their brain? Like what would that perspective essentially be? Same with like
I don't know
whales,
that
like,
one because I don't
dolphins
have a
and stuff.
dog. I have a cat. So
No, I think I follow what Bernie's saying. So Bernie, I believe, okay, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe when you have what do they call that? The cornea surgery. Elderly people get it all the time, and they remove your cataract surgery. Yeah, so when they remove those to grind them down, you can actually, if I remember right, you can actually see UV. The human eye can see UV. It's the cornea that stops it.
Oh.
So if the corneas were different, like quartz or something like that, right, then your eye could see UV. Now, I'm not sure what would happen. It would probably kill the cells in your eye, right?
Yeah, I would think it would fry your
does their brains perceive sound as like a light or a reality, essentially, like with the sonar, like of bats pinging dolphins, whales, stuff like that, even the elephants in their low range traveling sound waves?
Do they perceive it? Yeah.
Like would their brain perceive it essentially in like a 3rd or 4th dimensional understanding, almost like a supercomputer, where they're able to pick up through the sound waves, pick up the magnetic energy spectrum waves?
No,
I don't think they would do magnetic. I think it would be confined.
Sound
But I would say that
I think that's like more like a bird or something like that.
Yeah.
Uses magnetics for guidance, for example, for like they're gonna migrate from one area to the other. They use their internal navigation. They use magnetic cells essentially.
And I didn't even read it, but something new just came out with that too. Birds and magnetism.
Cool.
Some new, just like in the last week, I just saw that in the news.
Right. Well, I guess by the whole point in question, I guess I was like trying to perceive is that, do certain animals receive sound or magnetism in the same way that we see light potentially? And would that open them up to a whole new wavelength and like information or reality or existence, essentially? And would that be how the birds and different animals are able to be in tune with the magnetic waves and frequencies and patterns?
Well,
Actually, Carl and I were talking about this too the other
electromagnetic
day.
fields
So you
can
may have some things
adversely
to say on
affect
this.
bees, for example. Insects can be affected by the electromagnetic fields because of their structure. They don't. They're exoskeleton essentially.
And so in terms of like how they might respond differently, like there's different organelle and animals that will help them balance and orient themselves accordingly. I think it might actually have to do with metal ions, but don't hold me to that. But they certainly do experience the world differently than we do because of their, just their atomic, structure for sure. Birds navigate through other means that aren't visual or scent or otherwise. So,
does anyone know how whales navigate?
Sonar, don't they use sonar?
Through sound, right? That's getting back to my point of the bats, the whales, the dolphins, through the sonar, through that sound, that they're navigating through that So they must be able to internally compute and visualize all of that sound data as we see light. They must be able to also
Oh,
interpret
yeah,
that sound.
you're
and
probably
thus
right, Bernie.
But
magnetism.
some of their migratory paths are over 3,000 miles long. That sound doesn't carry 3,000 miles. They would have
No,
to
but
have
magnetism
they
is
have to have a
sound.
memory of mapping.
I'm
to
saying that
sonar.
I'm saying that the sound spectrum is essentially on the same property or wavelength or energy as magnetism. So that light is electricity, sound is magnetism.
Yeah, well, I
Well,
think
like
of
so
sound
is-
as phonons, and I think of light as electrons. Really, phonons are what sound is. So I think more of light being something that goes in a straight line, but phonons are more like it's vibrating, it's shaking, it's moving in a rhythm. So it's a rhythm of space, time, and
So it's not just a sine wave, it's
a compression wave. Phonons are
it's a
compression
compression
waves.
wave, exactly.
Yeah.
So you're gonna think
that's
me
the
an
full
idiot, but there are no
geometry of it.
magnetic waves underwater.
That's because they're both two-dimensional. Water, liquid is the second dimension matter.
No, you're thinking of phases. Why do you say there are no magnetic waves underwater?
Well, that's where sound and magnetism take shape in liquid, in your
Oh,
second dimensional state. And that's why you have your cymatic waves, your sound waves actually taking form in your second dimension, your liquid state matter, where light takes form in your gaseous matter. And that's how light is then able to move through your solid and your liquid, depending on I can't properly explain it right now, but it's a proportional, scalable, geometric, unified theory that I've started working out, but that they are all related and interconnected.
And Bernie, I was going to bug you for some art for the conference too. We need to get some conference art.
Hold on, I will pull
You
up
know-
the Martian drawings for you to check out.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe we should get some Bernie
Give
t-shirt,
me 5
Martian
minutes on
t-shirt.
that. Another thing I would like to discuss with all you lovely electrical engineers and great-minded people is how much you're aware of Tesla's cold electricity and the difference between cold electricity and hot electricity, and how hot electricity is including your amperage. That's what your resistance, the mass amount of heat, and your infrared energy is being included in that electrical, where your cold electricity is just the spectrum of the ultraviolet, and thus we waste so much more energy through our current hot electrical systems that are putting exponentially more energy of both the cold and the hot, the full energy spectrum through that, as opposed to just the cold and then stepping it up once you get to the use of your resistance and your load. And that's why your like LED lights have so little usage, so little inefficiency, is because they're put onto just the cold electricity and not having to put the large full spectrum energy through that electrical resonance. And it has to do with like Tesla's hertz. Your frequency of your circuit is being the cold, and the voltage and what your overall electricity or load is using, or your circuit's running off of, but that
So could I repeat that, Bernie? Basically what I'm hearing you say is that So hot
It's
electricity,
how you
for
can
example,
get
hot
zapped with a
electricity.
million volts and
Uh-huh.
survive when there's no amperage going through it, but just a small amount of amperage, which is that hot energy, that mass amount more going through. And it's how you're able, or Tesla was able to travel or send electricity wirelessly through large portions of space without getting the loss, because he was transforming and only sending the cold electricity part of the wave or the circuit that it resonates or operates on, as opposed to our current systems that have the full spectrum that we are both generating, then pushing through the grid, and then also using through all of our load circuits.
So like you use the example of an LED using cold electricity. So an LED is basically the opposite of a laser. Okay.
Well,
a laser works.
Of your
It
incandescent
uses
light.
it uses a narrow frequency band.
Yes.
It has a gap. It's called a band gap. Okay. While taking a bunch of power and dumping it in a resistor, it's gonna heat the resistor, and most of the power is going to be put out as in the form of heat in a broad continuum of energy over a broad spectrum. So cold energy is a narrow band energy.
Yes.
And then hot energy is a broadband energy. Correct?
You got it. And then the cold is on the UV spectrum of it. The hot is on the infrared spectrum of it. And that the way we're using and designing the system right now, it's the entire of it going through everything needing to be generated, and also like being wasted through all of it, where if it was just needed to be, if it was stepped down properly into the small spectrums to be transferred, to be generated, and then only stepped up into the hot amounts when you're at your home or at your place using it. Thus, you would be eliminating 80 or 90, if not higher, % of the overall energy needed to be produced, needing to be, and that would be lost to it all and everything like that, and thus reduce 90% of the fuel you have to burn to get that electricity.
Bernie, I'm rusty on this, but I do recall cold current. Actually, I talked to Tom Bearden about that, and I completely forgotten what he told me. If I meditated on it, I might remember part of it. But there was what you would want to Google, and I think Tesla Tech, right? Which we went to their conference. Tesla Tech would have some stuff on this. I believe what they call it is cold current. I just Googled it and it brought up ocean currents. So it takes some digging. But if I remember right, one of the ideas behind it was the potential is below background level potential for the energy. And so there was, and I'm trying to remember what he had told me. The idea was you condition the electricity somehow. One of the reasons they call it that is when you run it through, supposedly, right? When you run it through electrical equipment, the equipment will work, but instead of heating resistance points, it actually cools at the resistance points. And that's because when it hits a resistance point, because the electrons have less energy than normal,
and
when they pass through a resistance, they pick up heat from that joint.
And other spectrum energies from your environment, and it's stepping it and adding it into the circuit. And that's how you're getting these over unity on your pulse systems, on your Joule thief systems and whatnot. It's that you get your load circuit in harmony with itself, running on this one single lower spectrum, and then you're just tapping that resonance in from the hot source or the bigger source.
Now, one of the other things,
the last thing is the hot is your amps, your cold is your volts.
Yeah, and so one of the other things that you touched on, and this goes to the Tesla part of it, and this is pretty well known, is so when you're pushing electrons through a wire, right, you get heating from resistance. And so one of the things that Tesla was doing was using very, very super high frequencies. So you're pushing the E field instead of pushing the electron itself. So the electrons are wiggling, but they're not actually moving. And so you've got less resistance. And of course, the higher your frequency, the less of those. And in Navy ships, I believe that's an example of it. Anybody who's been in the Navy would probably know this. They, for a few different reasons, they use high frequency inductors. And so I have heard on ships or subs or something like that, instead of using 60 hertz, they use something like 20 kilohertz. And one of the reasons is because the inductors are smaller, so it saves weight, right? But but supposedly with higher frequency stuff like that, if it's tuned correctly, you also have lower losses because you're not actually pushing stuff through the wire, you're just wiggling it inside of the wire, and the field is
Exactly.
going to work. Yeah. So there's a couple of different concepts there, but the cold current, when you were using that term, that was actually, and there's a group of people out there. I wouldn't say it's definitely not mainstream. It would not be scientifically proven, but there's a group of people out there who believe that yeah, you can basically extract energy from an electron, almost like Randall Mills hydrinos, right? Where you're taking a proton below its background level. And so with that cold current idea, one of the things that I do remember about it is supposedly you could run that through a circuit, you could put it into a TV, and the parts that are normally hot would be cold because it's picking up energy from the resistance elements. So
Interesting.
yeah, if you do a little Googling, you can find it. It's out there.
You'll have, the key is to set up that circuit that is in unity or in resonance with itself on that one little wavelength, bandwidth of electricity or of hertz or whatnot. And then when it's in that resonance, in that unity, there's zero loss. And then you're able to actually get resonant energy from around your environment going into, especially through spark gaps and a double spark gap. It will suck the heat energy, your light, your sound, your all these just I can't think of, just your environmental energies that are everywhere, and turn it into that same frequency through that plasma spark gap and add electricity into your pulsed or your unity circuit.
Yeah, that I'm not sure about. One of the things I did play with, you mentioned spark gaps. One of the cool toys I played with was something called a nitrogen laser, a TEA laser, transverse electrical. I forgot the last. It's been a while. I don't know. Have you guys ever heard of those?
No, Tim, I'm going to shut down the live stream now. I'd like to thank all the panelists for participating. We can continue the open discussion, but I'm just going to end the broadcast because it's pushing almost 6 hours. And
we'll probably go a few more minutes on our end too, but then maybe around 6 we'll shut things down.
Thank you for watching.
Good seeing Jeremy.
Yeah,
so I got a question. I wanted to talk about my FOIA requests that I sent.
Yeah. You put it up on the screen.
Okay.
This is part of your suing the government project, right?
I think it's this one.
Somewhere in Washington, D.C., a bureaucrat is pulling their hair out right now. How am I supposed to get that?
Yeah, here we go. Let's see. Let me do that. Can you see that?
Yeah, it says I'm seeking releasable information on 2 publicly available YouTube videos: Alien Interview at Area 51 Parts 1 and 2.
Right.
And they include text frames stating Edward Snowden confirmed the videos is true.
The Area 51 Part 2 video states at 1 minute 11 seconds that, quote, "This is one of several 16-millimeter film reels discovered in an undisclosed government location. It is digitized in HD to preserve its original quality and presented in its raw, unedited form. And then I have a attached, I have a attached image of that. And then the Area 51 Part 2 video at 1 minute 15 seconds shows a Project Blue Book case information project number 220675 dated June 9th of 1964, MJ12E and EBE-3. This frame shows the Air Force listed at the bottom of the page. See attached image, and I'll show that to you in a minute. If this is not the appropriate agency for the FOIA request, I request you please forward my request to the appropriate agency FOIA office, or you please provide me the correct contact information for the appropriate agency FOIA office. Thank you. I am requesting you please provide information in your possession on the 2 videos if they are authentic, confirming that they are part of Project Blue Book, project number 220675, dated 9 June 1964. If the video still exists in their unedited version, and if they can be made publicly available and releasable to the public. I'm requesting you please make these video available to me. Thank you. Okay. This is how I try to talk, because now, and then here's this this image. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's got a project number and it's got the date right there. Now, it's the reason I'm showing you this is
it's an onion file. So that came over the Tor network.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, it has an address, it has an onion address. So it's linking you back to the Tor network, which is interesting.
Oh, okay.
That's
So,
the dark web. That's the
with that with that context in mind, let's take a look. I found this 3rd video.
What is scopolamine?
I'm sorry, Lulu.
In the video, he threatens him with scopolamine. I don't know what that is.
I
Some
looked
kind
at-
of an
and it looks
It's the
like
truth
that
serum.
truth serum. All right.
It's something. The problem is, supposedly, if you're exposed to bright light, it causes harm. It causes pain. So what they're essentially doing here is they're torturing this guy from the future.
Okay, so now tell me, when did the nuclear war start?
A half century.
By whom? So do you want to know? Oh, well, great. So just tell me the name of the show. Of course. All right, so just tell me what he does. take from blowing us up, we'll be fine, right? Wait, but you just said is that if we stop him, we won't be destroyed.
Well,
I don't know. Sounds a little preachy.
it wasn't continued.
It sounds a little preachy.
Yeah, it was pretty. I thought that was pretty cool too.
Sounds a little preachy.
Yeah.
That's-
So, but what the reason I brought up the date 64 and 50 years is that would have been 2014, right? 2014 since 1964, June 9th, 1964 is the date, and add 50 years, that's 2014, correct?
Well, maybe it was ballpark. You know, he's a time traveler. Maybe he doesn't even know exactly where he's at. He's like,
well, my point is something. Maybe we passed that point.
I thought it was the metallic voice that Jack Serfati talked to from the future.
The metallic voice. Say what? I missed.
Don't you guys remember Jack Serfati?
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah.
Oh, Jack. Yeah.
The metallic voice.
The metallic voice that he heard from. He got a phone call. Correct.
Yeah, from the future. It was a conscious computer on a craft.
I think
from the
that's
future.
that created a lot of trauma for Jack as a child. It appears. I
think that it did.
I think being able to discuss that is a very valuable thing. So that's
that narrative is actually repeated quite often in a lot of different scenarios in ufology. So it's like that cold metallic voice that the alien on your video talked with is
well, you know,
enigmatic.
actually,
I think
I listened to his voice
something.
inflections, and he reminded me of my older brother.
That's different. Not expected that.
So, you know, but I think it'll be interesting to see what they say about it. If you know, we never thought those other 3 videos that the government would say those were real. You know,
I have a feeling though that aliens wouldn't talk in like a synthesized cover-up CIA voice. They'd talk telekinetically because they were higher dimensional on just like the most part.
Yeah, well, the guy basically in the second video, he addressed why he could speak English, and that basically he learned it. He had to learn it to be able to understand our culture. But the other issue is he's number 3. It's interesting. I wonder what EB1 and EB2 had to say.
They didn't have anything. They died, I thought.
Oh,
did they? I thought there was only one that survived. That was, according to the lore I heard, is that there's only one that survived the crash that was able to interact with anybody. But that's one person's story.
Right. That may not be the EB, but maybe that was EB1. This there was one story that
there's so many new stories.
Government
Sorry, I wasn't watching. Were you playing like the supposed area 51 or supposed like 50s or 60s like gray
64.
recovery?
Yeah.
One?
Yeah, he was doing that
actually like that looks so legit. I wouldn't doubt that those like are legitimate, or at least 1 or 2 of them are legitimate. Like it's just too much of a setup for it to be a hoax. And like, why would they? And like, how do you get all of that like body and emotion and whatnot from
the guy from the future? He blinks. He's got eyelashes, and the one picture at the beginning where they expose him to light, you can actually see the discoloration on his skin and stuff. I mean, he looks. If this is fake, they did a really good job, and I don't think they had CGI back in '64 that would let them do that. So
Question: have you guys seen the shuttle when it like got blown up in orbit and then came burning down video of like?
no.
Oh my
No.
God, you guys have never seen the one of it getting like blown up?
I
by
saw
UFOs
it live.
before it burnt down. Like
I saw it live actually.
Oh, there's
haven't
Discovery,
seen that.
right?
Yeah,
Talking
the
about the
Discovery
watch
one.
that too.
Yeah.
I watched it.
Look over it, and
I saw that one
swear to
live,
God,
too.
you cannot find, if you have the original tape. I've discussed with several people. It does not seem like there's any discrepancies to like point out that it was a fraud, and if it was a hoax, it's like that was the best like CGI deserving Oscar, as well as like the radio astronaut guy's emotion and voice talking about it, and like before, and then them like getting the
was pretty
ISS astronaut assessing the situation, and like him
Bernie,
describing
I think you might be talking about something different than Carl. I think you're talking about the news reports, right? There was Challenger in '86. Saw that when I was a kid, and then there was Discovery.
So it's supposedly a video shot from the International Space Station. Well, the first clip is shot from Discovery, and it's like two UFO things coming up from somewhere around the Baltic or the Caspian Sea, and then it firing, and then the next scene is just Discovery in thousands of pieces, like blown up, but just how they were all moving in the orbit. It's like when it came out, because it's been out for at least 10 years, this video, like for them to have mapped it as a hoax, it's just like it's too realistic, and there just seems to be no like discrepancies or way to debunk it. From what I've seen, everything's consistent through it, and then combined with the air or the radio of the ISS astronaut, and like his emotion of it while going through the protocols to ground control, it's like that would also need an Oscar, and I highly like deserves an Oscar if it's faked, and I highly recommend that you guys check it out if you haven't seen it before.
Yeah,
Tim.
Columbia. It wasn't
Columbia.
Discovery. It was Columbia.
Yeah, it was the second one, the more recent one, 2006 was it or something, I believe, or 4.
Tim.
Yeah.
Tim, I didn't see the whole video he's talking about, but I did see a very shorter clip that showed the vehicle in space and the debris floating around it. And that debris floating around it, if it was CGI'd, it was very dang good.
Right? Like, and
I've
for
never-
how long ago it came out?
They had light prisms that could filter out the different bands of light where they could catch, the alien, because they move at a higher frequency than our eye could even see. So they would have to catch it, using the filtration of light.
Well, so the two UFOs coming up, it's two discs that like you can see like from a pin dot, then like go through a cloud, and then they like take form as they come up closer. Then they like hover like I'd say halfway in the orbit between the stratosphere and the space shuttle, and then it's like you just see like a zap, and then like it goes radio silence, the camera cuts out, and then the next clip goes to like the camera from the International Space Station zooming in on it, and NASA ground control going through assessment with the astronauts on ISS, describing it as they film in and see it. And it's like the greatest hoax ever, or that's actually what happens.
There's a lot of junk out there. There's a lot of space junk. If you ever look at a space junk map, I'm just seeing one now. There's a lot of space junk out there. Wouldn't it be ironic if that's what protects us from an alien invasion? Hold on, let me see if I can find a good one.
Just one second.
Here, this is Yeah, that's what that's what it looks like. This is a space junk map.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
That is insanity.
That's
That
not even
is absolute insanity.
there.
I got
How's that
mad
look?
flying through that. Oh man.
Yeah. So what I mean, what if it turns out, what if that's what saves us from Independence Day? You know, they come down in that giant cloud of fire and then bam, you know, they're
They
gone.
can travel through wormholes through international space, but not our broken up satellites.
That's right.
Or
Yeah.
they use that as relays for communication to bounce the signal off of. And you have so many different variations that could be used.
Or they just magnetically collect all the pieces and reform them into a giant weapon that will destroy the Earth.
Well, it's already a giant weapon. I think NASA was talking about, actually, Tony would probably know about this. I think NASA was talking about putting up some kind of a mesh to right. Tony, do you read anything about that? They were probably talking about that back when you were working at NASA still.
Not really. I never heard anything about putting up a mesh. I mean, NIAC has been funding some different types of stuff related to debris, removal and stuff, but I don't keep up with any of that, so I couldn't tell you anything.
Yeah, here's one from ESA. It says that's snagging a satellite.
Yeah, a mesh net would not work because it would create a massive, huge electrical potential difference between it and where it's positioned, and it would create like a massive shock. Like that one time they put that tether out, and it created the massive electrical differential and snapped and broke off right away and went flying out. That's why they can't do those long ropes or anything, because it's essentially a cosmic antenna that they put out, then that it creates, and a huge differential between the two.
It says, okay, of 18,000 tracked objects, only about 6% are functional. So of the objects that are big enough for them to track in orbit, only about 6% are functional, right? The rest of it's just.
I believe China is building a giant vacuum cleaner, though.
Well, a vacuum cleaner wouldn't work in space, though. Oh, the burn. They would turn it on and nothing would happen. It's funny.
An ion pusher.
And this is why we need warp drive, because we need to fundamentally be able to warp the fabric of the space itself so that we can suck these things in, grab onto them, and expel them in a direction that we choose.
We just found the first use for David Perez's technology to suck in space debris from around the ambient craft.
Don't suck in, push out of orbit.
Bring everything to the craft.
Well, it's ironic, right? Because Perez has developed this, what he calls a pulling engine or a sucking engine. And what we have is a pushing engine. So if you combine those two together, you get yourself a clear bubble. But
you actually get a fucking
at the
craft.
front, pushing at the back.
Yeah, you get a real craft. And it's what I keep on talking about, Jeremiah, is that there's two principles that you guys have been talking about for propulsion, which is anti-gravity and then gravity waves. And that's what's both necessary, I think, is that you need both scenarios. And the idea that it resolves as a consequence of one, I think it happens, but I don't know that it gets you very far. Anyway, it's a different topic. I didn't want to divert the topic too far away from everything else, because did you guys hear Kevin Day say at the end of his talk that a magnetometer collected data on UAP, and the implication that UAP are therefore emitting their own magnetic field, I think, is a consequence of that detection?
I think
Did
David
anybody else pick that up?
Vimana has done also some similar evidence collecting on that as well from the official UAP videos from the military too, supporting that.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that before. That's new information from my take on the whole UAP scene, is that everybody's been looking for that new detection method that might have a simple device to do so. And it sounds like Kevin just suggested that it might be a magnetometer. That was my take. I was wondering if anybody else picked that up.
we've actually had a lot of discussions in terms of trying to detect UAPs and how we would go about doing that. Let's assume that they don't have any vector potentials. Let's assume that they fly by some other mechanism that's maybe not even Lorentz. It's certainly not propellant based. Let's say that they modulate something else,
Buoyancy.
a nature of the space itself. So if they were doing that and they didn't have any vector potentials, how would we detect that? Well, LIGO would pick them up. We would certainly detect them, you know, flying over from any of these large gravitational wave facilities, but there are smaller devices that are possible to build that could potentially pick up these types of scalar potential fields. And so scalar fields are a little bit of a misnomer because they're just you're sticking your probe in a point in space and you're measuring what the potential of one particular unit that you choose, it's arbitrary, is at that point in potential. And if there's no vector potentials, we're not going to get an increase in voltage or an increase in current, or we're not going to get an electron flow. But what we could have is a slight change in the frequency of a clock that exists in that area compared to some other reference frame. And then the question becomes, how do we take a reference frame of a probe and isolate it from the reference frame of a standard so that we can compare how something might have changed over time? If we can do that, we can detect the slight gravitational anomalies that might be caused by vehicles that fly by new mechanisms that are not Newtonian. But it's a rather complicated mechanism. However, we've got, geez, Tim, you would be able to help me. That's the guy from NASA, high frequency gravitational waves. For some reason, his name is escaping me, though I know him very well. High frequency gravitational wave detectors and generators. He's been on APEC many, many times. Anyways, yeah, he's got a system that could effectively pick up UAPs. And it's been pretty well developed there near that. I just wish I could pull his name right off the top of my hand, but you know, non-asphasia always gets me.
Well, when I was ruminating on what he said, you know, thinking about the idea that, you know, a magnetic field itself, a traveling magnet, is in some way the model for what a UFO, UAP is. What's the anti-gravity propulsion mechanism that you guys have been speculating on that a traveling magnet would be most likely to fit into? You know, that like if Earth has its own magnetic anomalies, and it sounds like if it's detectable on a magnometer, that the UAP itself is a magnetic anomaly. That was interesting. I just keep that's in the back of my mind, just like that's kind of new information.
Do we have a system from satellite viewing towards Earth that can do that, that can test magnetic anomalies?
Magnetometer.
Rather than viewing it from Earth into space.
Yeah, we have several probes that are out orbiting Earth right now that are specifically placed out there to measure Earth's geomagnetic field and other magnetic fields that might be an influence. So we actually got some pretty interesting data from those, but I would say that more interesting than that even is what we got from Gravity Probe B, which showed a frame dragging effect from the mass of the Earth. And if we consider the space-time metric that we were previously thinking about as our general standard, that is GR, as our accepted principle, it doesn't account for frame dragging at all. So the measurements from Gravity Probe B were off because there was this detected differential between the position of the Earth and its gravitational field versus where that probe was. And we noticed that there might be actually another phenomena going on. Now, if you take a look at Maxwell's stuff and you look at the stress energy momentum tensor, that's the amount of energy carried in an electromagnetic wave, and you consider all of the matter that this planet is made of, it's constantly emitting electromagnetic waves, and they're crossing, canceling, becoming ever more distorted, but technically their stress energy momentum never goes away. So the fact that it exists in a local space means that the time distortion can create this type of frame dragging effect, and it could create propulsion forces in engines designed specifically to exhibit these types of properties. But there's a lot more to look into there. And again, with gyroscopes, it's just another fine example of how you can put something else that's stationary to your reference frame in its own reference frame, because it's orbiting, it has angular momentum, it's rotating, but yet it's stationary to you as a whole, but it does not have the same reference frame. So you can exchange energy between two of those systems. You just have to be able to modulate the stress energy momentum tensor of that local space correctly. And you can do that with electromagnetic fields. But the funny thing is you don't get these vector potentials. You crash the fields out. You actually cancel them out so that their vector potentials and their magnetic potentials for both your voltage and your current curves are all canceled out photonically. You end up with amplitude of 0 if you try to measure it in any particular form. But what does happen is a time gradient changes. So time slows slightly as you get a higher energy density. In fact,
Is it because you're collapsing its function when you
right,
measure it?
in a manner of speaking, it's not really collapsing the function. That's the strangest part, is it doesn't collapse it. The photons pop out the other side of the interaction as if nothing had happened to them. But the strange thing is they pop out a moment too late. And so there are some scientific papers that talk about the case of the disappearing and reappearing photon, where the photon seems to disappear for a period of time that's far longer than it should disappear for. And then it pops out the other side as if it was unaffected. But why did it slow down? Why did it take more time to transit through that coordinate measured volume of space than it should have? What happened to space? Were those purely electromagnetic waves, only photons, no matter, actually cross each other? And why did they slow each other down? And now we can see that if we send an EM pulse through rubidium atom gas cloud, we can actually create these entangled photon states and get massive photons that not only travel slower than the velocity of light, but even have a measurable torque that they can exert on an object when they hit it. And so all of these are properties of space. They're not necessarily properties of light itself, but light is itself a property of space. And so we're screwing with the space. We're screwing with the energy momentum tensor, the direction that its vector is canceled in, and the leftover energy that travels along that wavefront. And the funny thing about it is the velocity is arbitrary.
Would it be like something like the background cosmic radiation measurement? I mean, that would, you know.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It is a comparison against the background radiation, if you will, by either increasing the local amount of energy momentum in a volume of space compared to the background, or by actually removing the ability of the background to enter and influence the volume of space. We can literally change the rate flow of time within of a coordinate volume of space. And that's the crazy part, is that time seems to be directly tied to the amount of background electromagnetic energy that already exists from the presence of all matter that has already existed and has constantly emitted its fields, which are now traveling throughout the universe.
All right. Thank you.
Sorry, I know that was too much. I hope it made sense.
No, beyond and above.
Tim, I'm sorry. I'm going through my drawings. I had a couple Martian, whatever his name is, Marty the Martian guy picked out, and I don't know where I put him. So I am just digging through literally 10,000 different original sketches, but I'll have a few set aside for you to pick through by the end of this.
Sorry, put it on the stove. What I miss?
So I was gonna share, I got this article about general relativity that I'd like to share.
Awesome.
Okay, let's hopefully it doesn't spam me now. It's an atomic clock measured how general relativity warps time across a millimeter. And so what they did is they, this is their apparatus here. It's an atomic clock. And they basically have they had two, they're measuring at a lower 1 millimeter within a millimeter lower of an upper atomic clock, essentially is what they're doing. And let's see. Let's just read it to you. Millimeter might not seem like much, but even a distance that small can alter the flow of time. According to Einstein's theory of gravity, general relativity, clocks tick faster the farther they are from Earth or another massive object. theoretically, that should hold true even for very small differences in heights of clocks. Now, an incredibly sensitive atomic clock has spotted that speed up across a millimeter-sized sample of atoms, revealing the effect over a small height difference than ever before. Time moved to slightly faster at the top of the sample than at the bottom. That's pretty cool. So, but I just wanted to share that because
The time is tied to mass.
Right.
Somehow it's tied to gravity.
So yeah, it affects the mass and it affects the time. So basically, space-time is expanded compared to the space-time at the surface of the Earth compared to a higher distance above it.
You know, I thought I had a pretty good understanding of gravity until I had to figure out time.
Well, gravity has to do with space and time.
Well, I mean, you know, you could almost eliminate time to get a concept of gravity. You don't necessarily have to conceptualize time to get a sense of gravity. There's a truism, which is, I don't know if I've had any, okay, I'll just say it. Gravity is a consequence of the absence of empty space. And if you look at that statement, like you can think about it from a variety of different ways, and that remains true. And you don't need a unification of general relativity or quantum mechanics for that statement to remain true.
Say that again.
Gravity is a consequence of the absence of empty space. And you can trace.
I would argue that anti-gravity is a consequence of the absence of space, and gravity is the property of matter space. Where
absolutely, well said. Well said. Yes, that's exactly right. You have to remove energy from the background radiation to get anti-gravity. You actually have to somehow stop the background from being able to access your unit volume of coordinate space. And if you can somehow manage to do that, then that thing will weigh less. There's less energy in it. It can't interact. Fields can't get into it. So it simply weighs less. And the Earth will fling it off if you can get that differential high enough. But then we're talking, interesting
Conscious
differences.
perspective is also relative to that gravity of the situation of where you are, of the amount of conscious matter that is within that measured perspective of your gravitational mass. Might not make sense on the standard model, but it is a key to it, and it has to do with Einstein's relativity and the time. I guess just field relative of it.
So basically, if we think of it as the absence of space.
Yeah, I want to go back to that statement
as expanded space. So think of matter space as a place where there's a lot of concentration of protons. Okay, but those protons are relatively slow compared to the other protons. If we go out into empty space, it's not empty. It's still full of protons, except those protons are moving real fast. We call them cosmic rays. And so but the things in empty space, so space is expanded in an empty space and denser the closer you get to matter. So if you're on the surface of a star where there's a lot of mass, then time slows down, right?
Right.
But matter, the distance gets shorter. Space and time both are warped by gravity. It's not just time, it's not just space, it's both of them. Space is a time-dependent substance, while electromagnetism relative to that is time independent. It doesn't.
Okay. Is there some inverse relationship?
That's why the speed of light is the same. Where
is there some inverse relationship to the compression of space to the transit of electromagnetism through that compressed unit?
I would say yes, but it's only an edge effect.
Simply put, Carl, redshift, blue shift. Thinking it of
Oh,
that.
I hate it when people say that, man. It doesn't make sense to me yet.
So like
I know.
when
Well,
we're
all you're really
thinking of
thinking is you have a photon on an
expanded
X wavelength,
space-time,
right?
if you start moving your spaceship really fast, like you accelerate it to the speed of light, you can get a radiation burn from it because it's shifting, blue shifting the light. It's blue shifting the energy. And if you're near that object when it's blue shifting, you can get a radiation burn.
So I'm starting to understand that a little bit. Okay. Oh, fuck. You guys are going to break my brain for the night. Man, I just figured out how time and gravity are related.
Accelerated frame of reference slows down time.
I have something on the stove.
right?
I have to turn it off.
Okay. I'm gonna jump in with something far more boring. I am going to upgrade Zoom. I will do it after today's meeting. Right now we're on 720. Right now we are on 720 bandwidth, 720 HD, and I'm going to upgrade that to 1080.
Can you go on? I guess with Jeremy's StreamYard, you don't need to use StreamYard.
No, yeah, StreamYard would be some, yeah.
Tim, if it's all right with you, though,
So I looked at, yeah, so StreamYard is for small groups. StreamYard is pretty useful, but the thing about
StreamYard Business, and I'm working out with them. I'm in talks with the ownership to get a level that's in between it. And then it'll be that anybody that has like the professional plus that like I can join into your StreamYard and then start streaming your stream onto my channels as well. Sort of thing.
Bernie, the problem with StreamYard is StreamYard doesn't, it won't support large group conferences the way that we do Zoom. So so that's kind of the challenge.
So with that, it's because they're integrated and owned by Hopin online conferences, and that they have like this joint Hopin / Zoom deal that integrates the two of them, and then it's more complex, but it's exponentially better and easier once like you get it all figured out, sort of thing. But it allows for like virtual rooms for different groups to like talk in while you still have the main stages where people are all able to come on and talk simultaneously, while also having group chats that everybody are in, as well as private chat rooms, as well as also a marketplace that you will be able to like load your merch, as well as any affiliate links and stuff like that. And I'll give you an update on it down the road, but it's like an exponential better Zoom combination, because it will simultaneously broadcast to all of your social media channels, as well as all of your participants' social media channels simultaneously, while connecting all the live chat viewers and commenters into one platform, as well as they're integrating all of the sales affiliate links through the different platforms into it as well, so that you can start getting a revenue stream from merch sales and stuff like that, as well as the views and the advertisements that it creates.
So Bernie, show me the other ones. Show me the other Martians. I see the guy with the pyramid hat. I saw that one.
Yeah, sorry. I actually had like a Marty the Martian set out for you, and I can't seem to find it right now. And I'm sorry, I'll have to dig through, because I literally have like 10,000 different drawings. And
yeah, do you think you could spread? Do you think you could do the
exact one that you wanted, and I've seemed to misplace it in my clutter of a million different projects I'm doing all at once.
You do cool art, man. You do cool art.
It is.
I'd love to see him do some cool diagrams. I mean, I'd be down for that.
Would there be a way to do a graffiti version of that?
Absolutely, of course. And I'm just the idea slash oh my god, I used the word earlier. The guy that hires people to do the pieces and creates the parameters of the piece and then puts it into a final project or creation. But I don't actually do the drawing, painting, or coloring myself.
I'd be interested in some technical art if you ever decided to go down that road.
That is definitely what I'm.
Wait a minute. Have you seen Bernie's art? What kind
I
of
have seen
technical art?
Bernie's art.
What
I've seen
kind of
a lot of it. I
technical
haven't
art
seen
are
all
you
of it,
looking
of course.
for?
He's wanting my geometric.
I want him to channel his
universal
inner scientist
unified
and
theory.
put something on paper that gives us a direction to play with experimentally. That's what I'd like to see.
Because he's not exactly.
Oh, well,
this
okay,
this is
could
not
be. He is an
AutoCAD.
alchemist.
For you
He
right
thinks-
now, Jeremiah. Hold on.
Come on, Bernie. I know you can pump it out. You're an alchemist, right? Let's get on it, man.
Pulling it out of thin air. Everything you could ever need for that, and it is right here. And this guy has already built it for you. Where's the light? Come on,
Stephen Wolfram. Nice.
Museum of Science.
I haven't read that one yet, but it sounds like I need
He's
to
already
check it.
got the better operating software model of what you're asking for that I could ever produce in a lifetime. So
that's a great answer, Bernie. It's a great answer.
It is. I count on all the experts that attend this conference and are in the APEC 24/7 to basically guide us, because these guys know what they're doing. We're just trying to figure it out. So.
Hey, can I use that Wolfram detour to come back to an email I sent Tim? Tim, did you get the hammer off email that I sent you?
I probably didn't. My schedule is crazy during work. I mean, I probably got it, but it probably got buried.
Oh man, so the hammer off interview that you did was outstanding. I don't know if anybody here knows about this.
No, because it's not public yet.
It's not being recorded, so don't worry, nobody's gonna know about this except us.
No, actually, I am recording. No, I'm still recording. But
oh, that's great, dude. It's
you can edit
awesome.
it and do shorts and stuff.
Yeah,
it's awesome, man.
I've
You got to
actually got
publish
a
it.
team of YouTube
I will.
producers already, Tim, that I'm pooling together. That I'm also going to create through StreamYard another kind of like the UFO Twitter idea, but like a YouTube channel that everybody in the scene can sign up to, that they'll be able to do like one stream a week on, that your stream then goes on to everybody's channel. So you get an exponential exposure factor, as well as one of their streams each goes on to your channel. So then you're getting free view advertisements from their streams, also streaming extra content onto you. And then to put together like a weekly roundup short clip of everybody's stuff that will also include all the promos, advertising, and links of everyone involved. So
okay, yeah. Well, let me know how things go, Bernie. But so Carl, sorry you were.
Sorry,
oh,
one
sure
last
thing.
thing to tie into that. I also just accepted a media management position for a couple of music festivals, as well as a record label and promotional label out of Western Canada and Kelowna there. So I will be doing everything that you need and more. And we'll get back to you with that as I have everything. I'll be able to get the business to pay for all the business accounts that then I can use for free to help bettering all the online conferences and streaming and stuff that you guys are doing. And then it also helps interlock algorithms that give you the exponential gain factor and stuff like that.
Man, we gotta set up time, Bernie, to see demo and talk about that. Hey, but Tim, I know everybody's pushed on time, and I got dinner. So if Tim, I can't encourage you enough to publish the interview. It's really interesting. I picked up new information from it as far as what he has been suggesting, even hearing him talk about his future research is so noteworthy that I've heard him talk about before. So, and I don't know if Jeremiah is still around on listening, but he suggested something incredibly interesting at the end. And I talked about it a bit. The email is really long, I'm sorry. But it goes through microtubules and what he's talking about. And Jeremiah and I have had some really, just strangely correlated conversations about what he kind of talked about. But I think the most important concept that he, I think, alluded to at the end was the idea of a luminescent latency effect in future experiments. And that kind of really ties into conversations that we've had recently about photon entanglement and the idea that inside of microtubules, it's basically
Plasma state causing that, by the way.
it's like a fiber optic channel for biophotons in microtubules, and that the consequence of entangled biophotons could produce a state of detectable mass inside of a microtubule affecting tubulin state conformation. The idea is that in terms of Penrose, the notion of collapsing the wave function translated to a state of a tubulin protein is the difference between it being in a tense state and in a relaxed state. And the notion of what might trigger that transition in collapsing that protein's state is possibly gravity. It's possibly biophotons becoming entangled, gaining mass, slowing, gaining mass, and as a consequence, through the dielectric medium of water, H2O molecules, the signal is being transferred from the biophoton to the tubulin molecule, and that, as a consequence, changes the state of the tubulin.
It very well could be. It very well could be. I know with Hammeroff, there's a lot more that I probably need to do there. I mean, at the very least, I need to finish that one up. But I felt like he was kind of going somewhere. There was a lot of emerging stuff when I interviewed him that was like he wasn't ready to talk about it, or it wasn't. The research wasn't there. That the biosciences are moving really rapidly right now. So that was, it
was amazing to hear the interview. I'm sorry, Jeremiah. It was amazing to hear the interview because it was as if Jeremiah's and I's conversation was sort of like further like expounded upon by Hammeroff. Yeah. And the possibility that if I don't know what his experiment is going to be, but he talked about the delayed luminescent effect. I think I used the words correctly. But if there is strobing inside of a microtubule, that's delayed biophoton velocity. And the consequence of that is what we know to be microcavities within these microtubules. So if you think about a photon's wavelength, whatever that is, the distance, there are substructures in a microtubule that are shorter. And inside of those substructures, biophotons are getting entangled. And whatever that pattern is, potentially gravity could be detected as a consequence, is really what we think. I think, at least, and I hope at least. But I think Hammeroff has suggested that would be visibly seen as delayed light. Okay. Jeremiah.
I just texted you, Carl. I just chatted you I have 3 emails from him, and they're all variations, but I would say try them all if you want to email him. And he could.
Oh man, I can't wait, because I would really love to sort of like
Stuart's awesome. He's really nice. He's busy, right? He's a working anesthesiologist, and then the other part is they're dealing with COVID, right? It's the COVID era. Last time I talked to him, they've got a lot of stuff going on. They're pretty overwhelmed with it. But yeah, I would say email him and ask him,
I also want to know about, I'm sorry to monopolize the conversation, but I also want to know about the actual amino acid residues that he's talked about creating these pi resonances. And I want to know if those correlate to magnesium ions, because if they do, I think that's the metal ion that's resonating from the biophotons. And anyway, that's my thought. But I would really I look forward to that conversation. But yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, in terms of like everything we've been talking about, buddy, Jeremiah, I've been
Yeah,
looking
well,
at
I just have something to add to that, Carl. And just to kind of answer your question, let's just quote Tesla: "Throughout space, there is energy. Is this energy static or kinetic? If static, our hopes are in vain. If kinetic, and we know for sure that it is, then it's a mere question of time when men will successfully attach their machinery to the wheelwork of nature." And so what it's really talking about is that space is not this completely flat, consistent, even matrix of curvature. It's clumpy. It's not consistent. It's not flat. And you can change the variables that determine the space within a space, TARDIS mechanics, if you will, And the fact that we already have experiments proving the existence of these types of entangled states, massive photons. I mean, just think about those two words put together, massive photons.
Oh,
and it doesn't mean big photons, it means photons that have mass. That whole concept on its own should be pretty much a mind blower for people, but to think that these are already natural processes that we can create under controlled laboratory conditions. Let's think about it this way. If we've had millions of years speciation-wise to develop the most ideal mechanisms for survival, communication, and anything else that we would possibly need, is it really so insane to consider that maybe our brains could utilize these already known states?
Resonance factor communication.
Is it even crazier to think about the fact that we've fixated on this idea that nothing moves faster than light, except for the possibility that we have super luminescent biophotons right now inside of our brains.
Exactly.
That's entirely mathematically possible right now. Both, I think, super luminescent and subluminescent biophotons. I think that math is there. I think the structures are there. And I think every time we talk about metamaterials in terms of optics, at least, I think that our brains have provided the best architectural structure for a metamaterial for biophotons or any type of photonics. I would definitely rely upon that first before I think about anything else.
We already have two examples of that. We have the impulse pumped through the rubidium cloud as a subluminal photonic state entangled, and then we also have the superluminal states that have been observed in many cases. You have to go way back for the superluminal stuff.
We have to get that guy. We have to get the guy from MIT that specializes in cold atom photonics, and he has entangled biophotons on rubidium atoms and entangled them, and as a consequence slowed them so that they gain mass. He's at MIT.
Those together? Like,
Yeah,
seriously, he coupled those experiments together?
Yeah, dude, that's what I sent you.
Dude, send me the link for that. I gotta see this.
Dude, that's the email that I sent you like 3 weeks ago when I was flipping out about the whole thing about photon entanglement. Was this guy's experiment?
I seen the article of the rubidium cloud, but I didn't read anything about biophotons in there. And
That's why I was like, that's why I made that crazy comment about we need to lace a microtubule with rubidium and shoot her with the laser, because I think that's what that would happen.
How did I miss the part about biophotons? Oh man. Oh,
Anyway,
that's great. That's
it's our
great.
crazy
Now I gotta
conversation.
reread it again. This will be more fun the second time around.
Anyway, this guy is he's prolific. He's at MIT. He's actively publishing. He's credible amongst a magnitude of degree. I would, Victor, anyway, Tim, in the email that I sent you, it was basically a carbon copy of the Jeremiah and I's email.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I'll take a look then.
Yeah. Anyway, Jeremiah and I we've had a wonderful conversation the last few weeks. And great. I'm glad that we got to share a little bit with you guys.
Oh, let me see. And William Schramm was just asking about Standeo or William Line. I'm not sure who William Line is. I could reach out to Standeo.
He's the Pentagon Aliens author.
Okay.
I don't know. These are self-published books. They're probably not like big. But you may have not heard of this.
Yeah, I will look him up. Pentagon Aliens. Yeah, I have a list of folks that I'm going to reach out to this week, and then I have a growing list of folks that are like, yeah, we'll totally come on, and then they can't seem to find a date. So
sure. Yeah, Lynn's probably in his 80s if he's still alive.
Okay.
So, but he claims that he would like hunt through Sandia Labs garbage, looking for, odds and ends.
Yeah, I will reach out. I will reach out and see, because I'm trying to do invites for future speakers, just keep growing things. And then I'm doing some reach outs on warp drive stuff, folks who have written about LQB-Air, doing some reach outs on, related energy technologies, right? And that's something that like Mark and Jeremiah and I have talked about it. And I think probably everybody agrees, like energy that's kind of a touchy one, because the free energy community has a lot of stuff that just doesn't fit for us, right? But then it would be nice to, so I don't know. I'm trying to see.
Lynn's stuff is very tactile engineering. Like I found this thing and I would use it to make a saucer this way.
Okay. Yeah.
Tim, I need to schedule a presentation to finally show you the monoatomic / plasma / cold fusion stuff, alchemy I've been working on, as well as all the combined research and development with my buddy Mike there from Faraday Research, who's the aeronautics metal worker that built his own pulse motor and machine, and Don Smith's generator, and now he's combining all three of them there. You met him about a month ago. I brought him on there. I think you met him on Jeremy's stream.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, he's actually got working models of several different types of over unity generators, and explains where they're getting the energy, how they're doing it, and then combining all three of them into a higher yielding over unity device.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, well, just let me know, Bernie. And then let me see. I'm just going through here.
Hey, Tim, I'm sorry. Dr. Hamaroff's email, did you send it in a text or?
I sent it to your WhatsApp.
Oh, cool, man. Thanks.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, because I don't want to, because he's he didn't officially give it out, so.
No. And I would actually ask, preferentially, if you could introduce me, that would be a better way, because I wouldn't want to just be a random person that.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But respectfully, I'm eating food. And I
oh no, that's okay.
Want to say how much I truly love all of you, and how much I enjoy these conferences and today. And so
back at you.
Yeah, actually, my family just came home also. Well, maybe this is a good time to close the conference down then. Do you guys want to stay on?
I got one last request for you. If you could try to set it up to have Gerald Pollock from Washington University. He does like the structured water, or like the easy water, the electric zone of the nanostructures of the water, as well as Bob from the Fleischmann Memorial Project on us the same day that I do.
We've been trying to get Bob Grenier on for a while now, and he's pretty wrapped
I've
up
been
with
talking
the
to Bob, and he's open to it. It's just about scheduling the different time zone of
Well,
UK.
there's another
to,
thing, Bernie, too, and I needed to point it out. And Bob knows this too, because he's a professional. He knows that this is the Alternative Propulsion Engineering Conference. And even though EVOs offer an incredible opportunity for doing all of that stuff, especially if you look at Ken's work, I think that he's probably held off being a presenter at this conference, primarily because it doesn't tie so well into the propulsion aspects at this point. Mainly what he's
that's
working
why
on
I'm
is
saying
transportation,
structure
but
a
we do
day
need to
that
bring it into the alternative propulsion aspect, because ultimately that's what this conference is about. And there's a lot of energy conferences. I mean, Aaron runs one. There are a lot of different conferences for different subjects, even conferences designated just to alchemy, which if you don't already know about, you should definitely sort of take into, Bernie. But this particular one is all about propulsion and all about alternative propulsion mechanisms. So we want to really try to keep bringing it back to that as much as possible. And that kind of, we're at the end of the stage here. So we're talking about really esoteric and out there ideas that might actually be relevant to propulsion, energy production, and the other things that we'll need for a spacecraft. But ultimately, we need to bring it back to the topic of.
I would agree completely. I would say that David Wilcock, that guy, and his nonsense, he is ripping off the Fleischmann Project stuff right now, like talking about plasma ball, like he is grabbing from wherever there may be. But the Fleischmann Project stuff, they've talked about anti-gravity associated with plasma balls. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I am not the person to speak to that person's content or information, but I know I've caught enough to think that, like, okay, they're talking about something that's pretty close to what we've heard from APEC. But again, Jeremiah, you might be right. It might not be related, but I hear similarities.
They're related. I mean, they're related in a more abstract way, but unfortunately, it's kind of like, where do you draw that line? Where do you draw that very careful line in the sand where you stop from doing the propulsion stuff and switch over to something else that isn't necessarily the audience that's been catered for this conference?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And
The
there's
experiment would be dangerous because it would break down the H2O into hydrogen and possibly ozone. And, to keep that stable, that's a dangerous thing. If you structure the water with a frequency, it could break down the molecules. And then, that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think what Jeremiah is going to, though, is the focus of the conference. And and that's a challenge, right? Because you want to have diversity and you want to have different voices and different ideas and cross-pollination of ideas. But I think then also the concern is, like, if you stretch too much, it becomes a different conference. And I think he's worried that we might end up kind of losing the spirit of what's made this one work. So
Tim, one question. When does the energy become relevant to propulsion? For example, eventually a propulsion device needs energy input. So when does it become relevant to
yeah,
propulsion?
I understand what you're saying. And I actually, I've thought of getting a few different folks on. I think part of it is there is a big free energy community, but one of the challenges is they get involved to a depth that we probably don't want. And then just to be completely honest, there's a lot of junk out there as well, right? And so we don't want to wade through their junk because we've got enough of our own. That's part of the challenge. Now again, and in fact, I would say for energy stuff, that Tesla Tech video archive, and that's linked at the bottom of our page. Let me see if I can find their YouTube channel. There it is right there. I'm going to paste this into chat. The Tesla Tech conference has tons of energy stuff, and Steve Ellswick is starting to put like 20 years worth of video presentations online. So that would be if nothing else, simply in terms of like easy content, they would be people to follow. They have a massive existing library. And then for us, I think that's something to talk about, but we probably need to be careful, kind of like Jeremiah was saying. We don't want to stray too far, I guess, and that's always a challenge. it's difficult to know what's relevant and what's a bridge too far, I guess. That's
We've had a lot more of that challenge recently too, as so many new people are getting wise to the APEC conference and joining the effort and starting to take part in the chat. We've had a lot of very divergent ideas, which could be huge on their own, and they could totally reshape the idea of how humanity operates on this planet. But they're not going to necessarily make us a spacefaring race. They're not going to solve the major problems that we have with propulsion right now. And what makes this conference unique and really special is that we focused on just one aspect of all of these various sciences. And I'd probably say over 80% of our participants are professionals in the industry who already are actually getting paid positions to do this kind of research. And they are not going to want to be associated with the pseudoscience, as one would say. And so we have to be careful, because if we want those expert minds in this crowd and to be able to communicate with them, we can't make their names or their presentations associated with other things that would be threatening to their careers. And so we do need to kind of keep a bit of a clamp on it.
It's a balance, you know. Now I think that you could make a case and say that the Vimana would qualify as stuff that's too far out there, right? But you know, but then by the same token,
I agree.
You know, they're looking into Vimana tech too, though, and Mercury propulsion engines are also part of that. I mean, even Glenn was talking a bit about Mercury, interestingly, in just the public chat. And so we know we have people in here, professionals, paid professionals, that know about the weird properties of Mercury. And
I think
even tied into Vimana. I mean, Vimana is propulsion, right? It's very related, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, no, it is, and I think it's culturally relevant too, you know. And I think it's just an intriguing topic. I think it's something that, you know, it's stories, right? It's mythology that's been around forever. And so here, you know, here's a team, and the way that they presented themselves, and I think that's fairly accurate, is she is trying to reverse engineer it. It's like, okay, we're going to dig through these texts. We're going to try and reinterpret these texts as scientifically as possible. And look, we've built something that is aerodynamic, you know, and it's still true to the original stories, you know. So I think that fits. But then,
no, I'm sorry, Tim. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm terrible with timing.
Oh no, sorry. I guess my thought was, you know, it's all finding that balance, right? I mean, you know, how far is too far, I guess. And what Jeremiah is saying is right. There's always the credibility issue. So, but.
It's so true. And I agree that the idea that there could be flying palace structures, you know, it's seemingly intellectually far-fetched. But the idea that those things were documented in ancient history as such is really, really interesting. And how people came to the imagination state that they can write that stuff down is really interesting to me. Whether or not what they wrote down is scientifically accurate, but how they came to a state of their mind that they could intellectualize something that could fly, and what are those mechanisms that allowed it to fly? That's interesting. Yeah. And do those map onto current metaphors? And if so, again, which is why I asked the question, how did they come to that knowledge? Because I think, I forget the woman's name, she was wonderful. But what she alluded to was that there is a method by which these sages contacted entities that were off-world.
Well,
that is a modern narrative that scientists that we know of have tapped into.
I mean, I did an interview, this is last year, with Deepak Chopra, and you know, and so we talked about, what was it? I forgot the name of the book now, but the long and the short of it was the idea that he was expressing in this book, and I kind of did some research on it and tried to put it into a more Western perspective. But okay, so our bodies, our minds evolved over millions of years, right? I mean, we're evolved creatures. Language is very new, right? I mean, we're talking, I don't know, 50,000, 100,000 years, something like that. But language is an overlay onto the brain, The brain didn't evolve for language. And so what he was talking about in this book, and I kind of had to think about it, right? But most of us, I think, as human beings, we've had like those spiritual experiences, right? No matter what they are, at various points in our life, we've had spiritual experiences where we feel like there's more, and oftentimes we can't express that into words. And my takeaway from reading his book was we evolved to think in pictures and reflexes and things like that. And what we're trying to do is take this experience, right, of the experience of thought, because we think in our own way, and we're trying to pack that into this little box that we call language. And so when you're talking about contacting other entities, or Mark has talked about the Akashic records, there are various names for it. I think part of it is the human brain is probably, I would say almost certainly, capable of operating much more efficiently than we use it. And the problem is that what we do is we take everything and we run it through this overlay network, right? And so we may have this brilliant, grand idea, but by the time it gets packaged up and put into language, it's inside this narrow little box and it loses the context. And so, I mean, that could play a role also. And I think it also plays a role with UAPs, because we probably don't realize how fundamentally language defines us. I mean, maybe they can't communicate with us because they simply can't speak the same language. I don't know.
I think those are great points.
It's an interesting point. It's something that I've kind of thought of, like how would you think without putting things into words? That's the challenge, right? And in Chopper's case, he was saying meditation. Meditation is how you clear the mind. And once you practice, you're able to think without putting things into words, but then there's a corollary to that also, which I think is interesting, because you look at spiritual leaders like Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad or any of these major, and one of the hallmarks of these religious figures is that they have these grand experiences. And you can almost tell, right, when you read through these sacred books, you can tell that they really can't put them into words well for people to understand, and so you end up with religion where you have Jesus, who may have this incredible vision of the universe and all that, and he's kind of like, okay, well, here's some rules and here's some commandments, and then just ask me a bunch of questions, I'll tell you if this fits or doesn't, and so I think part of it is those prophets, if you call them that, they were able to think without words. They were able to think without objects, but they can't bring it back, because when they try and bring it back, they have to reinterpret it and it doesn't fit. So I don't know. I don't have a complete solution there. That's kind of as far as I made it. And I was like, okay, I think there's something there. There's something worth exploring. That's it.
I think that was well put, Tim. I would have to agree with you.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't bring back the inarticulate. You know what I mean? Like there's that the notion of gnosis, of knowledge within our heart, and that we are intrinsic in some capacity, and in that intrinsic nature, there is something that is absolute, and so it's
and maybe that goes to the microtubules. I mean, that very well could be a large part of it, right? There's a ton we don't understand about the brain, in some ways. I mean, in some ways we've mapped certain aspects to it, right? Like Brokaw's area and things like that. We in some ways we know that it's a little bit like a computer, but then there are other aspects to it that are completely different, like how memories are stored and things like that. So.
Fast forward to the email that I sent you. Okay, so in your Hammer Off interview, you mentioned, or you asked about the separation between quantumness and what we understand, or what we can conceptualize, the collapse of the wave function. What is the separation between the two? And what I wanted to say in my email was that the separation between the two is the layering of quantumness. And that's the separation between the two. And so like, as you know, the notion of that microtubule and the collapse of an individual tubulin structure from one state to another means nothing. It's more about the macro causality of the quantumness layered, not in one single microtubule, but in how those microtubules layer on each other inside of one neuron. And that is the quantumness, that the layering of quantumness that results in the action potential firing. And there's so much, we see that layering so frequently throughout nature and biology in terms of receptor signaling and how receptors have to have multiple ligands in order for it to propagate from extracellular to intracellular. And so the separation between quantumness is the layering. And as that layering builds up and as that signal throughout the tissue builds up, you get that propagation of the signal. I don't know if that made sense, but like, yeah, that's how I would separate the difference between quantumness and reality. It's the layering of quantumness on itself that results in that action potential.
Okay. Yeah. And that very well could be. I mean, that would connect it back to, you know, the fire or no fire for the neuron, right?
Yeah.
You know, at some point it has to connect back. You can have quantum processing inside of it, but at some point it has to connect back to whether or not that neuron fires, you know?
Yeah, that neuron firing is associated with the traffic of cargo along that microtubule. And so the layers of that quantumness is going to affect that traffic of that action potential. And so it's like a traffic, all of those things are like traffic signals layered on top of each other for the action potential. Should we stop? Should we go?
Yeah.
We all go, we all fire. We've collapsed the wave function.
I see what you're saying.
God, I hope so, because I don't think I do anymore. Listen, folks, I really appreciate you guys, but I'm going to let you go because I feel like I've talked myself into stupidity and I'm no longer.
No, I think, yeah, we should probably close the conference down unless anyone else has anything to contribute for this evening. Looks like, are you guys all set?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting us. And having
Well,
me in here.
thank you for joining us for yet another conference session. Okay, I will close
And
things
thank you
out.
again, Tim, for doing this and for taking all that time to keep everything coordinated and not chaotic.
Yep.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you as well. Have a wonderful evening, guys.
Good night, everyone.
Much love. Bye, everybody.
Bye.